Welcome back to the MizzouToday Show, powered by On3 and Rivals. Kyle, it's been a little bit different these last couple of weeks. We've done one show for the bye week this past week, and then two road games that you were at in Vanderbilt and Auburn. Yeah, man, that's actually three road games, right? Or just two? Yeah, Vanderbilt and Auburn. Man, my days are getting twisted now. Can't believe it's already November. Only 4 games left on the Missouri football schedule, and one of those is probably the biggest test of the year, the biggest game. I wouldn't say test. I mean, you're going to be the underdog facing number 3 team in the country, Texas A&M. Mizzou coming into this one at 22, which I guess was a little bit of a surprise to many with the first rankings coming out for the college football playoff on Tuesday. That's where the Tigers stand as the number 22 team in the country. Might be weighted a little bit when you don't have your starting quarterback from the first 8 games of the season in Bo Pribula, who is down with a lower leg injury. So right now, we're going to look at Texas A&M, and I think a good place to start is on this offense, and a little bit different than last year. Maybe not for Drinkwitz, who was expecting to see Marcel Reed play in Aggie land last year, but he will get to face Marcel Reed this year, and I know he poked a little fun at himself for this, what he called semantics last year when he was expecting Connor Wegman not to play, who had been banged up at parts at the beginning of the year last year for Texas A&M. Of course, Connor Wegman transferring to Houston, staying in his hometown this offseason. What did he have to say about Marcel Reed before we get into some of these offensive weapons that Reed has to play with?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing he said was that he's been on the Marcel Reed bandwagon before anyone else, because you got to remember the reason he had those comments last year is Reed had played, I think, 3 or 4 games leading into that one in a row and had looked great. And Texas A&M had tailored the offense around him. It looked totally different from when they had started Weigman at the beginning of the year, and it just seemed like, they were moving in the direction to go with Marcel Reed because it had been effective. Obviously, going with Weigman was effective against Mizzou. So, it worked out to be a soundbite that got used against him, but the whole point of it initially was he thought Marcel Reed had been doing an excellent job and would continue to do an excellent job. And clearly this year he has, because, Texas A&M's undefeated. Reed's been playing fantastic. He started to work his way into Heisman conversations, which I feel like we're talking about every week now as Mizzou's facing a Heisman level quarterback, because we were talking about that with Diego Pavia. We were talking about that with Ty Simpson against Alabama. I mean, it's, Jackson Arnold wasn't in that conversation the same way, but this is now 3 of the last 4 games where we're saying like, yeah, they're going against the Heisman guy. And if you look back at the beginning of the season, there was talk about that with Lenora Sellers coming into the year. Obviously that didn't end up working out that way this season, but talent wise, he's up there too. And people were talking about that with Jalen Daniels at the beginning of the season, kind of the same thing with Sellers, where like, obviously that's not how it's worked out, but it was in the conversation at the time. So it's just over and over and over again, we're talking about how the quarterback the Tigers are going against is elite. And Drinkwitz said the way Reed's been playing recently reminded him of going up against Lamar Jackson back in 2016, 17-ish, when he was at Louisville. Just the way he's running, the style of play kind of reminds him of that. And, it helps that Reed has a couple of pretty fantastic weapons to go to and a great offensive line. So that whole offense is going to be an issue.
2 of those offensive weapons are transfer wide receivers, first years with the Texas A&M Aggies. KJ Concepcion, who came over from North Carolina State, and Mario Craver, who came over from Mississippi State. A lot of Mississippi State wide receivers on the move last year, with Missouri knowing that really well. But looking at, some of those offensive weapons, those 2 names, stand out. Terry Bussey was a 5-star athlete at one point. Jamarian Morrow, that's a name Mizzou fans should know. He flipped from Mizzou to Texas A&M right before signing day last year. He was really active in that LSU game near the end. Of course, it was a blowout, but the guy can play. He's a very good all-purpose back. He's a part of that running back room with Ruben Owens, E.J. Smith, some other names, Amari Daniels. So I believe is down with an injury. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. I'll look that up whenever I throw it over to you. But it's a very talented team, top to bottom. I think Texas A&M might be pleasantly surprising people this year. I think there was, still high expectations for this team to battle and be in a spot to make even the SEC title game, not just the college football playoff, but really just owning the SEC right now as an undefeated team, number three team in the country, highest ranked SEC team. What's about some of these weapons that are really standing out for the Texas A&M Aggies?
I mean, the two receivers you mentioned are the big ones, right? I think it's KC Concepcion, not KJ, but he's been fantastic. Mario Craver, as you mentioned, has been fantastic. Their run game's been great too. I think Le'Veon Moss is not expected to play at this point. I talked to our colleague Mark Passwaters over at Aggie Yell for Know Your Foe this week, and that'll come out tomorrow. But I think he said Le'Veon Moss is not expected with an ankle injury. So Ruben Owens is the starter at running back, but he's been solid too. I think that pair have pretty similar numbers from when I looked at it for what to know and how to watch early in the week. So, and obviously when you've got Marcel Reed back there too running, it makes it a dynamic threat that is very confusing for defenses and going against an offensive line that's bullied people, right? So if you're getting a lot of yards before contact, the run game is going to look pretty good one way or another. And on the surprise point, I mean, I think most people are surprised by any team that ends up 2/3 of the way through the season undefeated, right? I mean, even the best teams year to year, most of the times don't go undefeated. And Texas A&M has done a great job of surviving its close games, which is, tends to be what makes the difference for those top end teams. It survived Arkansas in a shootout. It survived Auburn in a rock fight. And it survived Notre Dame early in the season. So, there's been kind of different things in each of those games, but what Mark said for Know Your Foe was Notre Dame and Arkansas stayed in the fight because Texas A&M was missing tackles on defense. So the Aggie defense is a talented unit, but maybe that's the spot you can take advantage of. And if you're Mizzou and have Ahmad Hardy at running back, maybe that's something that can work in Mizzou's favor.
Do apologize to KC Concepcion for getting that one wrong, but I was thinking about the running backs position as well, and I knew there was an injury in Le'Veon Moss, who had 12 carries for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. Of course, that really 75-yard run right out of the half in the second half against Texas A&M last year. We were both at that game. Amari Daniels was right behind him with 9 carries for 34 yards. So, I mean, a good running attack coming back and multiple, guys coming in. Like we just talked about Jamari Morrow and some other running backs really stepping up for Texas A&M at the position. Ruben Owens, of course, and then, E.J. Smith was also on that depth chart for the Aggies. Looking at, the defensive side of the ball, you're talking about the missed tackles. One name that, keeps coming up, and I know you asked about him on that defensive side of the ball. Can you tell us a little bit about Cassius Howell, who's a Bowling Green state transfer?
Yeah, he transferred from Bowling Green going into last season. So he was part of the game last year. I don't remember. I didn't look up his stats from that game. I don't remember if he did much. But this year, leading the SEC in sacks with 9.5. Next closest is 2 guys with 8, and I can't think of who they are right now. But he's been the leader in the SEC in sacks pretty much since week 2 when he had 3 against, was it Utah State, I think. Had 2 again last week against LSU. So, and he's been piling them up since conference play began. So it's not, a number that was built up against cupcakes or anything like that. It's a consistent performance of being able to terrorize opposing quarterbacks. He's a Kansas City kid, which he's a 3-star coming out of high school. I looked that up this morning, and Drinkwitz made a point when I asked him to say, like, big whiff on Mizzou's part for not recruiting him out of high school. And I don't know what the transfer portal process was like for him. He was a 5-star coming from Bowling Green going into 2024. I'm sure Mizzou tried to give him a call, but how far that got, I don't know. But Drinkwitz was sure to say, like, the Tigers could have done a better job there, and he wishes they would. But Mizzou ended up with 2 pretty high-quality defensive ends this year anyways. And he's just the other main point that Drinkwitz made when I asked about him was he's just another in a list of elite defensive ends that the Tigers are going against. Because like I was talking about with the quarterbacks and the Heisman conversation, every week it's a conversation about how does Mizzou block this guy? If it's Dylan Stewart, or if it's LT Overton, or if, both of Auburn's guys, or I can't remember Vanderbilt's star defensive end's name, but it's over and over and over again. There are these elite pass rushers that you have to stop if you're an SEC team. And, Howell's among the elite, and he's just, it's another guy on the list that, like, yeah, that guy's fantastic. We're going to have to figure out a way to stop him.
Maybe a little bit different from Nick Scourton last year, but that's where my mind goes. Guy who transfers in from Purdue. It was first year. Of course, Cassius is a second-year transfer coming in. I was looking at the stats last year. Nick Scourton had 3 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, 2.5 tackles for loss in that win, that big win over Missouri. Go down. Cassius Howell had 2 tackles, 1 by himself in that game. This year, you're talking about those sacks. His career high is 9.5, so he matched that from 2023 in Bowling Green. Looking at those sack leaders, too, Quincy Rhodes Jr. is tied for second with Colin Simmons, who gave Vanderbilt a fit. I don't know if you watched any of that game, Vanderbilt, Texas, but he was in the backfield a lot, and he is up there. And, of course, Damon Wilson is in 5th. Zion Young tied for 7th in sacks in the SEC this season. Looking, at this Missouri team now, really the only big difference, and you noted this on Twitter on the depth chart, of course, is Matt Zollers. That's the only change coming in, freshman quarterback. Of course, everything was expected to go this way after Bo Pribula went down with his own lower leg injury. Second for the Tigers this season with Sam Horn in that QB battle in week 1 and getting injured on his first play. What have you heard just about Matt Zollers this week? What has Drinkwitz said? What have the players kind of put together, just for some of those stories you put together? Because we talked about the quotes from a lot of the teammates, the offensive linemen, wide receivers, what they really liked about Matt and his presence on the team. But it feels like there's a lot of moxie with this kid, and it feels like he's ready for the test from what the coaches and players are saying.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just a consistency in players and coaches having faith that he is ready. It's not always the case with a true freshman, but it seems everything that I've heard is that he's at least got the right mentality for it. He's not going to get overwhelmed by the moment, and he's got all the arm talent you could want, which, is enough to make a great quarterback sometimes. If you can keep your mind right and you can make the throws, then you can get the job done. Sometimes you don't need other stuff. Other times you need a lot of the other stuff. So we'll see how that other stuff comes along. I'm intrigued. Drinkwitz was asked during his press conference about paring down the playbook. And he said something to the effect of, it's not about whether he has the full playbook. It's about tailoring the offense to what he's comfortable with. So I don't think he's going to be restricted in a way you might expect with a true freshman quarterback, or with, kind of the way we saw the offense was a little bit restricted with Drew Pine at times last year. I don't think that's going to be the case, but it might look a little different, which I find fascinating, because Drinkwitz was sure to mention in that answer, there are certain things that Zollers is comfortable with that Bo Pribula was not. And there are certain things that Bo was comfortable with that Matt is not. Right. So you're trying to tailor the offense to what you think your young quarterback is most capable of, knows the best, is most comfortable executing on the field in a big situation. So I don't think it's going to be like a drastically different offense than we've seen, but there should be some adjustments, and I'm interested to see what those are.
Drinkwitz has praised Matt for his arm strength as well, and just arm talent altogether. And there's a lot of athleticism for Matt as well, with his ability to move around in the pocket and escape that pressure as well, which you've seen from quarterbacks at Missouri the past couple of years. Bo Pribula, of course, Brady Cook as well was a good scrambler at times when he was healthy with the Tigers. First freshman starting quarterback for Missouri since 2015. Drew Lock, who started the final 8 games of that season for the Tigers. Of course, now the backup quarterback in Seattle, played this last week in a blowout win over the Commanders. I don't know if you saw that. Kyle went in, gave a couple handoffs before the time ticked away. But before we get into some predictions for this game and some final wrap up, Kyle, quick read from our sponsors over at Roback. If you're watching with us on the YouTube, both wearing the Hezzy hoodie today, there's only one way to describe Roback: best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Roback, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable active wear. Roback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. With novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of active wear. Roback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They are both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Roback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code MIZ20 on roback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of this week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with code MIZ20. Kyle, I forgot to mention this as well. We will be getting into a little bit of a basketball talk as well, just kind of recapping that Howard game. But before we get to it, we don't need to go too detailed, I guess, about the Howard performance, but really just necessarily point out some positives and some different trends that you saw in that game, watching and covering that one remotely. But I pulled up our predictions for this Texas A&M game in the preseason. Of course, we went through all 12 games, all 14 weeks to see how the Tigers would perform. And if you'd believe it, we both had 27-24 win. We weren't, I guess we didn't know that maybe this would be, such a strong Texas A&M team. We probably did know that this would be a ranked matchup. But Texas A&M has, probably bested all expectations with how it's performing. I'm not saying that there was really any low expectations, but Texas A&M is playing a very good football right now. And Mizzou has a freshman quarterback in there, so I'm sure those numbers will change. Kyle, you can go first.
Yeah, I did my first prediction for talking with Mark for tomorrow's story, and I went with 27-20 Texas A&M. It's kind of a similar argument to what I made against Alabama going in. It's less about the team specifically the way it was with Alabama than it is just this is an enormous moment, is a top 5 moment. Mizzou's going in with a true freshman making his first career start. I think the defense is good enough to give Mizzou a chance, like we've seen these past few weeks. And the question is just whether the offense is going to operate efficiently enough to take advantage of the opportunities presented by a strong defensive performance. And I'm going to need to see it first. I mean, like we talked about with going into the Alabama game, Mizzou likes that motto, something to prove. And, they have no reason to want to prove anything to me specifically, but I need to see them actually show up in a moment like this before I predict them to do it. So I've got 27-20 Texas A&M.
Mizzou is 16-5 across its past 21 games. 3 of those losses did come in the 2024 season. Blowout losses on the road to Texas A&M, and then Alabama, you lose your quarterback Brady Cook to injury in that one, 41-10 and 34-0 respectively. And then across their last 3 losses have all been one score, with one of those coming on the road at South Carolina 34-30, and then one score losses to Alabama and Vanderbilt this season. I thought Mizzou did a good job of responding against Alabama. I know there were still opportunities to win that game when you flip it to home in the next season. A very different looking team, from offensive weapons to who your starting quarterback is. And I think that'll be the case too when you go from playing at Kyle Field in October of last season to playing at home in November with an expected sold out crowd. It's a blackout. You're still going to probably finish this game at night, even though it's a 2:30 kick, and it's going to be a lot of emotions behind this one. We also have a freshman quarterback, and I thought Matt did a good job playing against Vanderbilt and stepping in. It also could be in part to not really having much film. The Commodores probably didn't have or planned much for Matt, and I think that Texas A&M will have a little bit more on tape to know what to expect from him. But I still think there's a lot of optimism with what Matt can bring to this offense and guide it in the correct manner in lieu of Bo Perbula. And I think there's a lot of excitement for Missouri. We've seen that from hearing Drinkwitz talk about it and some of these other players and some of his teammates. I still think it'll be a close game as well. but I'm leaning more in the realm of like 28-17. I think it's a close 2-score game. I think this Texas A&M team is very deep, at every position, especially on offense. There's a lot of wide receivers, a lot of running backs that can get involved in this offense, and the defense has done a great job limiting teams this year, especially ones with Heisman caliber players. But I think it'll be a close one, just possibly a lower 2-score game.
Yeah, and before we move on, there was something I looked up for between the columns this week, which is SEC teams going on the road in consecutive weeks. I think the number I found was teams were 5-6. That I knew that it was under 500 going in. I didn't realize exactly how it was going to break down, which I think was all of the top 5 or 6 teams in the conference were about 1-0 in their second consecutive road games, and all of the bottom teams in the conference were 0-1 or 0-2. So it's not quite as telling of a statistic as I think it looks on paper. But the other thing I did find out is Texas A&M is now the first team in the conference this year to play 3 consecutive road games. They were at LSU 2 weeks ago before a bye, and at Arkansas the week before that. No other SEC team has gone on the road for 3 consecutive games this year. I don't think anyone has one scheduled that way, but I don't completely remember at this point. There might be another team that has one upcoming. But it's hard to win on the road, no matter what, especially in the SEC. And Texas A&M is now looking at trying to do it 3 times in a row, even with a bye week. Last week, they haven't played in front of their home crowd since the last time Mizzou played in front of its home crowd, but Mizzou gets to this week. So that could be a difference maker in this game too.
There is a world where Mizzou could finish 4-0, especially if you get that win against Texas A&M. You have an opportunity to jolt yourself into, in the college football rankings. I think that would be a massive jump, of course, beating the number 3 team undefeated in the country at home with your 3rd string quarterback. I mean, that would be pretty impressive. Kyle, this game, 2:30 Saturday on ABC, Missouri, the home team, of course, at Memorial Stadium. Any final just takes or looks at this game before we throw it over to some basketball talk?
Yeah, just college football playoff wise, I think people, me included, were a little surprised at the 22. I thought Mizzou might end closer to 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there. I do think, as you mentioned, not having the starting quarterback that you've run out the last 8 games makes a difference. And I think Mizzou was penalized by not having a marquee win up to this point, right? Because Kansas and South Carolina just don't look as good as they might have at the beginning of the season at this point. So Mizzou really doesn't have a win against, a team that's in legitimate contention. That could change this week if the Tigers beat the number 3 team, an undefeated Texas A&M coming in. And as you said, that could really, really change how the committee and the analytics that they're using now view Mizzou. If you're looking at a 7-2 team with a top 5 win, staring down, a final 3-game stretch that includes Mississippi State and Arkansas, which are games that even with Zollers, I think they should be favored and should win. And then a tough matchup at Oklahoma. So, 22 is probably a little disappointing for those first rankings, but that can change quickly if Mizzou is able to take advantage of the opportunity it has in front of it this week.
We were doing predictions too on the Tiger Walk on the message board at Mizzou Today, and I don't remember what number you threw out, but I think I was in that 19 range, and someone threw out 21, one of our active members, and I was like, that's a good floor. I think that's a good number that, if there's really like a belief that this Mizzou team will be drastically different with Matt Zollers on the starting at quarterback, then maybe that's where you go. But 22, I mean, I was a little bit surprised by that, Kyle. I pulled up BetMGM, the betting partner for On3, just to see what the experts are looking at just on a point spread wise. Would you like to guess what the line is for this game?
I think it's Texas A&M -7 now.
It is. So Texas A&M -7, that over under is set at 47.5. And I think There is a world where that game does go in the over, even with how good both these defenses are. There's still probably some holes, and like Mark talked to you about, maybe some tackling issues with that Texas A&M team that they probably want to clean up going into this one. But that's where things stand here on Wednesday when we're recording this preview. Okay, Kyle. That's enough for football. Let's talk basketball. It's the first time we get to actually go into basketball this year, a sport I like a little bit more than college football at times, just with how exciting and how fun some of these games can be. And you just never know in the basketball world. I feel like it's a lot easier for a non-major to win in basketball than in football. But Mizzou coming off its first win of the season, went on the road, play Howard. We know we've known about that game for a long time, but a lot of positive reviews too of from the national side. John Rothstein tweeted about it, giving props to Dennis Gates to go on the road and play a team that's not at the Power 4 level. It's not a Power 5 among some of the best teams and best matchups, but going on the road, playing a Howard team that has some good transfers, has some good size to it as well. And, Bryce Harris was a name that was thrown around a lot. He scored 27 points for the Bison in this game. Tigers come away with the 88-67 win. What are just three major takeaways you took from this one? I know it's very good three-point shooting, but as you noted, it'll come down to earth. You'll regress to the mean. Sean Phillips was active everywhere. Also, maybe one of the shortest rotations ever in response to injury, but still, only 9 guys saw the floor in this one.
Yeah, 3 biggest takeaways. I think the length of the Tigers is going to be a key this season, right? We've talked about that in all right amount building up to the season. The transfer portal guys that were brought in really transitioned from a guard-heavy team last year to a forward-heavy team this year. And there are, 6 guys listed at 6'10" or taller? I think you start with Trent Pierce, Northweather, Javon Porter, Phillips, and Trent Burns. Okay, so 5, 6'10" or above, and then Mark Mitchell and Nicholas Randall listed at 6'9", and Jacob Cruz at 6'8". That's an incredibly tall roster. Howard did not have the size to match up. Their tallest guy was a 6'10" true freshman from Lithuania, who I think played a minute. So there really wasn't a rotation where the Tigers didn't have the tallest and probably also the second tallest guy on the floor, which opened up a lot of opportunities for Sean Phillips. And second main point, he looks fantastic. I mean, he's not an incredible ball handler. I think he had 6 turnovers, but he looks competent when he has the ball in his hands, which is a little bit different than Josh Gray. I really liked Josh Gray and what he brought to the team last year. It's wild how different I feel seeing a pass go to Sean Phillips than I did to Josh Gray. And he also had a double-double against Kansas State in the exhibition, so this isn't just a 7-footer going against a team where the tallest guy he's facing is like 6'8" or 6'9". It wasn't just that. That was part of it. And then third key point, you brought up the threes. I think Mizzou was 10 of 19. The percentage is not going to be 50%. It's just not how basketball works. I do think 15 to 20 is a pretty good range for what the Tigers should shoot for. There were games last year where Mizzou took like 35 or more 3-pointers because Caleb Grill was out there taking like 10 and Tamar Bates was taking 7 or 8, and Marquez Ward came in and fired up 4 or 5 in limited minutes. Like, that's just not what this team is built to do this year. This team, along with that length and along with having guys like Ant Robinson and Sebastian Mack, is built to charge the basket. And I think they did a really good job of that. They won points in the paint by 30. I think it was 46-16, which is incredible. Even against a team that has a size mismatch in the post. And they weren't settling for threes just to put up attempts. I think they were taking, the reason that percentage was so high is they were taking open looks when they were presented with it, which is the way that I think this team should go about it. You can't, when you're built the way Mizzou is this year, you can't just fire up threes just to do it. But if you attack the basket enough, teams will collapse their defense to try to stop that. And then that leaves you open, and you can throw out to Jaden Stone and he can hit a couple of threes, and you can throw out to Luke Nordweather, I guess, and he can take a 3 or 2. You have the guys who can hit when they're open, and if you maximize the quality of opportunity instead of the quantity of opportunity, then that's going to make the percentage look better as a team.
Mizzou without Andrew Boateng, Trent Pierce, and Trent Burns for this game. Looks like things are trending well for Pierce and our Boateng to come back. Of course, Trent Burns coming off some surgery they had late into the summer, so still waiting on him to get cleared and be ready to play. And that's even more length that you could have someone that Mizzou still hasn't seen on the floor in an actual competition yet after missing the majority of his freshman season with a foot injury. But looking at this, I liked what you said about Sean Phillips. The first time we've had a guy, or we've seen a guy, not had, but seen a guy at Missouri, maybe like Jeremiah Tillman, more of like one of those more traditional, very athletic bigs who can do it all. I think size-wise, they're a little bit more comparable. I believe Sean Phillips is also, he's 7 foot, and Jeremiah Tillman was around 6'10". So I think those the first time you've kind of seen that in the Dennis Gates era, and it's a very exciting time for Missouri basketball, just with a lot of this length and maybe a different style you might see that comes with that. I wanted to just do this kind of quick award, Kyle, that maybe we can just do for each basketball game. But the Drew Smith Underrated Performance Award. I don't know if you were around for the Drew Smith days, but there were a lot of people. I had a lot of friends that were upset that he didn't win SEC Player of the Year in that 2010 to 2021 season. Had a very great final season in that year when they made the tournament, got bounced by Oklahoma. But mine in this one, I think, goes to Jaden Stone. I don't know if it's underrated. He had 13 points, which was the second most on the team. But we come back from a pretty serious injury at West Virginia that kept you out for so long. He has 5 rebounds. He's 5 for 7 from the field, 3 for 4 from the 3-point line. It feels like when Caleb Grill came back almost. I know Caleb Grill had, some hiccups, knocking off some rust right away after that, I believe that wrist or hand injury, his first season with the Tigers, and comes back in his second year and he's shooting the lights out a couple games in. Kind of feels like that almost too. And Caleb Grill had a very scary injury too. And he came back and performed well. So you're just seeing guys performing and coming back and bouncing back in this Missouri program. And I think that's really cool to see for a guy like Jaden Stone, who probably at one point didn't know if he would be playing college basketball again.
Yeah, he's gotten the chance to tell his story a little bit now. And, had a severe head injury at West Virginia that held him out for the year and was pretty ready to be done with college basketball, be done with basketball overall. And, I think he was on one of the podcasts that the team puts out after media day and got the chance to say, like, he didn't want to be a guy who transfers all around and is just searching for any opportunity, but he got the call from Gates and staff and just liked it enough that he thought it was worth it to keep trying. So he was also the name that popped into my head when you mentioned an underrated performance. I think he played very well in pretty limited minutes. I like his shot a lot. I think he's the type of guy coming off the bench who could be an injection of offense pretty quickly. If that's, kind of the build that we're looking at for him this year, I don't think he's going to be, a starter at for any consistent amount of games unless other injuries happen. And I, with how Gates operates his minutes and rotations, it's hard to say exactly what he's going to get throughout the season, but I think he's a guy maybe kind of in the feel of Marquez work last year, where like you need something to happen in the next couple of minutes. So you throw Jaden Stone out there and he kind of sparks something and gets something rolling. I think that's the type of guy he can be, even though obviously he's a very different player from what Marquez work was. But I think that type of spark off the bench, offensive ignition is kind of what you could see from him throughout the year.
I like that one too. I think that was brought up on the unwritten rule too. Maybe there's a good comp there. I know at times Marco's work kind of disappeared in some of those conference matchups where they didn't really rely on him as much. And maybe there's like a Caleb Grill look to it as well, with how well he was effectively shooting from the 3-point line. Because coming into the year, my biggest question was 3-point shooting, possibly defense being improved, but who's going to pick up a lot of those 3 balls that you lost in Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill as well? And I mean, 10 for 19 is a good start, 52.6. But as Kyle has mentioned multiple times, regression to the mean will happen. He won't be shooting lights out every single game. This game, finished 88-67 in favor of Missouri. Tigers have 2 more games before our next podcast, and then we'll be previewing the Minnesota game, finishing that home and home after not playing it last year next Wednesday. But Southeast Missouri, so SEMO on Friday, cool Friday game, 7:00 at home. The Tigers will be playing at home their next couple of games until December 2nd for the SEC ACC Challenge with Notre Dame. So the game will be in Indiana, but VMI on Sunday, pretty cool game too, because a lot of overlap between the two staffs there. Some former Missouri assistants, of course, are now on staff at VMI. So there's 2 games this weekend. I'll give you some quick just notes as well. 7 p.m. for that Friday game against SEMO and SEC Network Plus, and then 3:30 p.m. Sunday on SEC Network against VMI. Kyle, just any thoughts into those 2 games and what you're looking for? Not necessarily looking for a preview or what to know about those teams, because of course you're just looking for wins in those ones. You just keep moving forward. But what are you looking for just from this Mizzou team as it gets healthier too?
My key thought about those 2 games is I'm going to be really busy this weekend. I don't know if there's going to be a ton to take away. I mean, it's kind of similar with Howard, where it's like, these are games Mizzou should win by a pretty commanding margin. Stuff should generally look relatively easy. It didn't always against Howard, which was kind of my takeaway right when the game ended is, it was a 21-point win, but there were significant minutes in the second half that looked uglier than they needed to against a team that's, Ken Pom 300 plus. It's going to be similar for a lot of these early season games where like the point of these games is they're supposed to be pretty easy. You're supposed to be able to do what you want on offense. You're supposed to be able to kind of control the other side of the floor on defense. I haven't really looked into either of the teams coming in this weekend. I don't think either of them have a guy like Bryce Harris off the top of my head. And he was kind of that key piece that made it, an issue in the second half, because like you said, it ended with 27 points. He was kind of controlling the ball. Howard had another guy whose name I can't think of, who ended with 20 plus because he hit a couple of big threes there in the second half. But that's kind of the point of these games is you should be in control basically start to finish. And that's mostly what I'm looking for, is for Mizzou to handle business the way it's supposed to. That wasn't always how these games looked at the beginning of last year, especially. I think a lot of these early season games were a bit closer than fans probably wanted, especially if you look at like Eastern Washington around that game. Those were much closer than I think fans wanted them to be. So I guess the key that I'm looking for is it should look like Mizzou is in control, basically start to finish in both of these games.
Alex Cotton, 20 points, one of the starters for Howard in that game. 6 for 12 from 3, 6 for 14 from the field. Only shots were 3-pointers in that contest against Missouri. That's who you were looking for, Kyle. And before we get out of here, $1 flash sale right now at MizzouToday and On3. Get access to everything, $1 for the first week. And you can sign up from there, on3.com/sites/Mizzou-today/join. You can become a member for only $1 in your first week. Talk with Kyle on the message board. Got conversations about bowl games every week. Fun things to just kind of take advantage of and join a Mizzou community that's still growing. So we thank you guys for tuning in. And as Kyle has this very busy weekend, a lot of recruiting stuff too. Might get another sold out recruiting section. So just a very busy weekend for the Tigers. Hope everyone gets a chance to watch those games. There's opportunities to tune in other places if you're still having issues with YouTube TV and any SEC or ACC or SEC, ABC, ESPN networks. So still a lot to take advantage of. And if you can't watch it, come join the threads with Kyle. He's updating you on everything that's happening in those games. Even saw this week you were among like the top message board users at On3. So congrats to Kyle there. But we will see you guys next week and enjoy the very busy weekend in Mizzou athletics.